Okay, Chevra, we're going to be learning out of Likutei Sichos this week. We're going to be learning out of the Rebbe's edited works. Usually we learn from the Torah Menachem, which was either partially edited or unedited, officially by the Rebbe. The Likutei Sichos, the set of Likutei Sichos, is work that has been edited and worked over by the Rebbe for publication. And this is a talk that the Rebbe gave. Today was Hey Tevis, the 5th of Tevis in 1987 and 86-87. The Rebbe's celebrated the return of his Sfarim, of the books. And the Rebbe gave a talk that night, and the talk was edited by the Rebbe, and we're going to be learning that talk connected to this week's Parsha. So it's on Parshas Vayigash Vayar. So the Torah, the Rebbe says like this: Parshas Vayigash, it's the second Sicha in the Likutei Sichos, volume 30. The Rebbe says, "Ala pasuk Vayar HaAgalos asher shalach Yosef." So we're talking about the story of Yosef and his brothers. So it says that Yaakov, being told by his sons that Yosef is still alive and the ruler of Egypt, and then he sees the wagon sent by Yosef. And then the pasuk continues, the verse continues, "Badchi ruach Yaakov avihem," that Yaakov, hold on a second. Yaakov, that ruach Yaakov aviem, that his so to say his ruach, his spirit became alive again from seeing evidence that Yosef's alive by seeing the wagons. Means he heard from his sons, but when he sees the wagons, that gave him a whole new life and certainty of the story. Eisav and Midrash, the Midrash teaches like this. Huva appears Rashi Torah, and the Rashi quotes this Midrash. That why did Yaakov? What happened when Yaakov saw wagons that Yosef sent? I mean, why is that a sign? Why did it give him a certainty that Yosef's alive so much so? This is by Tchi Ruach Yaakov Aviyim, that his soul became alive with excitement and knowledge that his son is alive, Yosef. So Rashi explains, Shazeha Yisimon Sheshalach Yosef Yaakov. There was, I sort of say, a hidden message that Yosef was sending to his father by sending the wagons. That that in case the father would not trust his sons that Yosef was still alive, he said through the wagons he was telling his father and his sons, his brothers, to tell over that when I was taken from my brothers and sold to Egypt, when I went on my mission on behalf of his father to check out how his brothers were doing, that was supposed to be a short mission. They were learning Parshas Eglah Arufah, the laws of Eglah Arufah. We learned this in Sanhedrin, where a body is found in between two cities. We don't know who's responsible, which city is responsible. So they behead the young calf. Ha'isi Oisek, and those were the laws that Yosef was learning with his father, the laws of Eglah Arufah, of the beheading of the young calf in a city where we don't know who was, where there's a city where a body was found outside a city. We don't know who is responsible for his death. That's why when Yaakov sees the wagons that Yosef sent, the Midrash explains, I see clearly. Rav is like, it's fantastic or great or even more. My son Yosef is still alive. Then what did Yaakov say? Yaakov said, the Midrash says, he wasn't saying Rav as in a great statement. Sha'omer Yaakov, Rav koiche shel Yosef b'ni shekametzaris higiu v'adayin hu oimid b'tzitkei harbe mimeni. That he was saying, Rav, that Yosef is greater than me, because I could see that how much sorrows, how much difficulties did Yosef go through in this experience of the past 22 years, and he stood in his sitkis, in his righteousness, even greater than I did. That Yaakov also went through challenges in his life. So his father is saying, when he sees Yosef sending him, then what is his message? Not, the weather forecast in Egypt or pictures of his palace. He sends to Yosef, he sends to his father about the Torah they were learning, that he remembers still the subject of Torah. They were learning when he left his father, which was the laws of Eglah Arufah, the laws of the dead body found outside the city. So with Parshas Kavanas HaMedrash, what does the Medrash say? The Parshas with Kavanas HaMedrash. The Farish Oid Yosef b'ni Chai shu Chai Noisef al Chaim Gashmim. That Yaakov was happy to see that his son didn't assimilate when he went down to Egypt and became this great king. That not only is he alive, begashmis physically, But mainly what his excited Yaakov was, Chaim Ruchnim, how Yosef was still spiritually alive. Chaim Amatim Livnei Shel Yaakov. He was living the proper life, like the life of giving nachas, and what his father would expect of him, Yosef the Tzaddik. And he's saying, Oid Yosef B'ni Chai. Yeah, Yosef is living not as his own person, a person who assimilated, who came the viceroy of Egypt, but he's my son. He's living in the legacy of his father and his forefathers, Avram and Yitzchak. And that was the sign that Yosef showed him, not just that he's alive, but he's alive and he's learning Torah, and he still remembers the subjects of Torah that they discussed before he was taken and sold off to Egypt. This is what Rashi quotes from the Midrash. The Rebbe continues, Hasimin Shemasa Yosef the Aviv, Sha'od Yosef Chai, the Parshas. Vasher Yaakov Hikish Yosef Oimid B'Tzidkoi. The idea that the two Midrashim has, that Yosef was letting his father know that he was alive by giving him a sign that only he and his father would know the subject they were studying. So it couldn't be a false claim. And also, not just that he's alive, but he's alive in his righteousness. And that's what his real life is. That he's still thinking about the subjects of Torah study that he studied before they left. There has to be a connection. Means Yosef himself wasn't just showing his father that he was alive physically, but his message was also that he was alive spiritually. Not just that his father understood from the message that he was alive spiritually, so because he found a way to communicate that he was still alive by discussing the private studies they had together, but also Yosef himself was trying to tell his father that don't worry, that although I was in Egypt and although I became a viceroy and I'm running everything, I'm still the same righteous Yosef. Okay, moving on to Parshas, the very fact that Yosef, 22 years later, remembers the subject of Torah they were studying, and they didn't study one subject. It says that everything Yaakov learned in the yeshiva, he taught over to Yosef. So he studied many things, but he remembered exactly what they were studying when they last saw each other. It happened 22 years before. He was showing his father that the subjects that he studied and the Torah is important to him, and he was thinking about it and remembers it, and he's the same Yosef, the righteous Yosef he was before. Okay, that's the simple understanding. It makes sense. The Rebbe says we have to understand. We know that every story that's told in the Torah, especially when it comes to the fathers, is exact. Because seemingly, the idea that Yosef sent wagons to show that this was the subject, because an Eglah is also a Agalos is a wagon. Eglah means also a young calf. So it's a play on the words that he sent by the wagons. He was hinting that he remembers the subject that they were studying, but it could have been any subject. And then he would have found another way of showing his father that he remembered the subject. But seemingly the subject itself has nothing to do with Yosef and his father and his being a tzaddik still. It was just showing that he remembers the Torah he was studying. It happened to be they were studying the Torah of Eglah Arufah, of the cow that's beheaded on behalf of the body that's found outside the city. But it has nothing to do with the story itself. But the Rebbe says, no, can't be that way. That we have to say that everything is exact. So too in our case. This very fact, that what is the specific sign that Yosef sent his father, that he's still alive, spiritually and materially, physically and spiritually. It wasn't just any side sign to show that he remembers the subject he was studying. The sign itself, the subject itself, is a sign about Yosef's success and how he behaved while he was in Egypt, which is the Parsha of Eglah Arufah, the story of a dead body found outside a city that we're going to learn a little bit more in a second. The subject itself shows how Yosef is still alive. As some of the commentaries explain. Now, based on this, so the very fact that Yosef was trying to show his father that he's still righteous, it's not just that he's still righteous because he remembers the subject he was studying, but he's still righteous also because of what the subject was. What does this mean? What is the laws of Eglah Arufah, like we studied in the Talmud? In Eglah Arufah Vayar Parshas Aksuvim, the story is like this. The law is like this. If you find a chalal is a dead body, on the ground, noifel basada in the field, We don't know who killed this person. It's a sign, obviously, he was killed or she was killed, not the sudden death, let's say, right? We don't know who killed him. So what's the law? The elders and the judges, meaning the Sanhedrin Agdoila, the great Sanhedrin of the assembly of 71, have to go out. Do and they measure which city is closest. It means who's most likely to have been some sort of that there couldn't be some sort of connection to that city. Would be they would measure where's the body closest to. It could be 20 feet, it could be 1,000 feet. A lot of Shimon. And after making the examination, they realized they don't know who killed this person. They would take a calf to the brook and behead it from the back, and then they would say that our hands have nothing to do. The elders would say that we have no responsibility for this death. We didn't do anything. We didn't see this person in the city. We didn't not accompany him. We didn't know he was here. So they're basically, it's saying that we didn't knowingly abandon this person. The Chozikni are here, and all the elders of the city, Yirachtu Yadeim, they wash their hands in the water with the blood. And they say, our hands have not spilled this blood. And not to say, obviously, they didn't kill him, but they didn't not give him the proper treatment as you would give a guest in your city by giving him a levoy, by accompanying him, not leaving him alone or her alone. One of the reasons why they make such a big commotion, that maybe this whole commotion about trying to find the killer, the dead body in the field, maybe one way or another, the scene will give more information to find out who the murderer was. That others should see and be fearful, not to think that they could get away with murder, as it's brought down. So what's the idea? The idea is by the elders and the Sanhedrin going down and explaining that they weren't involved and they didn't leave this person, they didn't abandon this person, and we see the whole commotion and the whole Sanhedrin is there and they're measuring and they're spilling the blood, so that will give others a fear and to learn not to get involved, not to leave a person, not to leave a person alone, or surely not to murder someone. So that's the law. What is the spiritual lesson of this halach, of the law of a dead person in the field? And the avodah of it, how it connects to our service of God, is what Yosef was sending a message to his father. Chalal, what does it mean, a dead body in a spiritual sense? B'muvan haruchni, in the spiritual sense. This is referring to a person who's dead spiritually, meaning to say that this person unfortunately has disconnected themselves. They become nifsak, separated from their dveikus, from their connection to Hashem. Because Hashem is our source of life. Right? God's our source of life. So if you're not connected to Hashem, you're like a dead person spiritually. Like it says, Hashem, you have to be cleaving to God. Your Lord. He's your life constantly. So why would a person be disconnected? What causes a person to be spiritually no longer alive? Because he's in the field or she's in the field. Neufel, it's a dead person in the field. What's the field represent? We learned about this in the months of Elul, of Melech Basada, the king in the field. This field is Makai Mishal Eisav. That's Eisav's field, not Yaakov's field. Ish Sada, he's the person of the field. That he attacks those and gets involved in the people in the field. He's the person of the field. And when people go out to the field of Eisav, you're living the life of Eisav, and the life of Eisav is not a life of Yaakov or a life of a Jew. You go out to the field spiritually, not just that you go out to work, but you disconnect from what should be your tent, your base of Torah and Judaism. And then going out to the field of Eisav takes you and tries to disconnect you spiritually from your source, from your godliness. Chalal, you become a dead person in the field of Eisav. You don't have to be 100% spiritually dead, but you're definitely weakened under the influence and the spirit of Eisav. So what does the Torah say when there's a person out in the field? Do you leave that person just lying there? take no responsibility and say, well, who asked that person to go to the field and become influenced by Eisav and become disconnected spiritually from God? So no, the Torah says, the Torah tells, the elders, the judges, those responsible for the Jewish people can't leave that person in the field. They have to go out to the field. That's the job and the responsibility of the elders and judges of Israel, in general, including the great court. They have to do whatever they can to fix the situation, so they should no longer be possible. Why are people dying in the field spiritually? What have you done to keep people connected, to not fall under the influence of Eisav, the person of the field? As they say, there's no way we would let this blood spill. If we knew that there's someone spiritually suffering, someone spiritually in pain, someone spiritually getting disconnected and influenced by Eisav, we would never leave that person alone. Later, we didn't see that person. We didn't notice the person. We didn't pay attention. We didn't leave that person without substance, spiritually, without accompanying that person. Because had they seen that person, that's their responsibility, to make sure everyone has the nourishment, the spiritual nourishment. And if they need the company to stay and to be able to go out in the world and stay connected to Hashem. The lavis kol ish Yisrael, to accompany every Jewish person, that goes out to the field and not get captured and taken in by the field of Eisav. And to give that person, he or she, substance, like, food for the road, which is Torah, which is called mazon, garments, which is the mitzvos. If you see a person naked spiritually, you have to cover that person. You see a person that doesn't have words of Torah, bring that person home. Give the person the basics, how to daven, say Shema, how to learn, how to say the davening. And get the person accompanied to doing at least the basic mitzvahs. The Torah Devei says, what does it mean naked? Naked spiritually. A person doesn't have Torah mitzvahs. If you see a person's walking with empty, spiritually naked, you have to clothe that person. Give that person mitzvahs. You have to sustain that person. Give that person Torah. You have to make sure that if the person has to go out to the field of the world, but is that person geared? Does that person have what it takes to go to the world and stay connected? And not just stay connected, but to thrive. And here the Rebbe goes even deeper. Not just was the message to Yosef, from Yosef to his father, that he wasn't a chalal besada. He wasn't spiritually dead because he got lost in the field of Eisav in Egypt. But initially God made it so, because they didn't know that what they studied before, Yosef had to go out to the world and a new reality, no longer in the comfort in the home and the security of his father's home, that what he would be studying are the laws that would give him chizuk, strength, the Eglah Arufah, not to be a chalal besada, not to be spiritually dead in the field. Before Yosef goes down to Mitzrayim. And what is Mitzrayim? Erves Haaretz, the most immoral place in the world. Egypt is. He was like captive he was literally captive amongst the nations, disconnected from his roots. God made it so that the subject they studied was something that would give him the spiritual substance, spiritual strength, to stand and stay strong in his righteousness. Although being thrown and left alone in Egypt as a slave and as a prisoner, and eventually as the king of Egypt, the person who controlled Egypt. And that's why Yaakov taught him that subject. Because that's what the job of the elders is. That before someone goes out to the field, to give them the substance they need, the strength they need, to accompany them the way they need to go through the field. To give the person what that person, he or she needs to sustain themselves and thrive as a Jew, connected to God even while they're in the field. So again, maybe consciously Yaakov didn't know that, but subconsciously Hashem made it so that that's the subject they were studying. To give him everything Yosef needed and everything anyone who goes out needs. As long as the person's out in the field. And that empowered Yosef to stay righteous in Egypt. So therefore, 22 years later, what's Yosef's message back to his father? Not just that I'm alive and I remembered what we studied. I sustained myself on the subject that we studied. When Yosef wants to show his father, he's spiritually alive, not just physically alive. He showed Yaakov through his sons, the Agalos, which reminded him of the subject they were learning. Parshas Eglah Arufah, that this empowerment of the subject they learned before he went down to Egypt, which is the idea of Eglah Arufah, not to be a dead person spiritually in the field of the world, because he studied that with his father, it gave him the strength. He didn't allow himself to get spiritually affected by the environment and the narrative of Egypt. And he stayed complete in his Torah and his righteousness. And therefore, when Yaakov sees the wagons and sees the message, the cryptic message that Yosef is sending him, that not just that he's alive, but he's alive in the way that he wasn't a meis besada. He wasn't a chalal besada. He wasn't a dead body in the field. He didn't lose his connection. He stayed righteous. Then Badachi ruach Yaakov beruchnius. That's why Yaakov got the spirit. When he saw the message, it gave him this ruach beruchnius, the spiritual strength and excitement that his son went out into the world and accomplished and stayed connected, stayed righteous, and not just stayed, it's not survived like we're going to learn, the Rebbe says, but thrived in Egypt. And we know that Yaakov, the Gemara tells us, that his whole life is dependent on the success of all his children, of all the descendants of Yaakov, throughout the generations, how they stay steadfast, close, and connected to Hashem and His Torah. As long as Yaakov's children are alive, spiritually, Yaakov is still alive. Okay. Now, this part I'm going to go a little fast because it's just a more technical book of it, but we have to go through it to get to the next part that Rebbe is trying to say. We still have to send. The Midrash says that Yaakov doesn't just say, Yosef is Rav, I'm happy, he's still alive spiritually. He said more, like we learned. Rav oid Yosef b'ni chai, Rav koichi shel Yaakov, Yosef b'ni, hu oimid b'tzitkei harba mimeni. Yaakov says about Yosef was even greater than me. Yaakov also went through challenges, also was away from his father, also was living in Lavan's home and all that it entailed. And that's the message he sends Eisav. Im Lavan Garte, kept the Torah mitzvahs. But nevertheless, Yaakov says Yosef is even greater than me. Oimid b'tzitkei harba mimeni. He was able to stay righteous more than I was. Shechatasi, I sinned. Shamarti nistra d'rachem Hashem. He thought that maybe God forgot about what's happening to Yaakov. Like it says in the Midrash of Yaakov, when Yaakov says to his sons, Lama ra'isa li lahad li'ish ha'ida lachem ach. Yaakov said to his sons, why do you have to tell him the man? He didn't know the man was Yosef. He thought it was this wicked king. So he said, why do you have to tell him that there was another brother? So God says, I'm working to make his son king in Egypt. That God maybe doesn't know everything that's going on. He's like kind of forgetting about Yaakov's pain. I know exactly what's going on. The point is, why does Yaakov have to say that Yosef is more righteous than him? Why is that important? The idea is that Yosef thrived and survived and remembered the subject at hand that they were studying in together before he went down. And because of that, and by the strength of that, he was able to stay the same righteous Yosef. Why does that mean that Yosef is greater than me? Also, just in the subjects of the conversations Yosef has with his brothers, and Yaakov's seeing that Yosef is alive, there's two, we stopped the reading between Shlishi. We finished the third reading, and some people have the custom, the fourth reading of Vayar, HaAgalos, Vatchi ruach Yaakov avim. First it says Yaakov's spirit was excited, and only afterwards he says, and the next aliyah, Chamishi, Vayom Yisrael Rav oid Yosef b'ni chai. So why did we stop in the middle of subject? First he says he sees the wagons, and he gets excited knowing that Yosef's spiritually alive. And then we stop the reading, we call up the fifth person, and then we say, oh, Yaakov continues to talk. that Yosef is even greater than I. We should have just let the subject continue and stopped the reading him at another point. So the question is why we stopped. Same thing is about Shlishi. Between the reading that over there, Yosef is talking to his brothers. First, Yosef says at the end of the second reading, you didn't send me here to Egypt. Heina here. God sent me. I'm like the father of all of Egypt, the Pharaoh. Like I'm running things. I'm the ruler. And then so first Yosef is talking to his brothers. We stop, and then Yosef continues to talk and say, you didn't send me here, Elohim sent me here. Because Yosef was saying before that, Ani Yosef, I'm your brother. Don't feel bad that you sold me here. Because God was sent me here to give you life, because by him being viceroy, he was able to sustain his brothers, because now they're in a position to have strength. Otherwise, who would have known if there was a famine? And there was a wicked king, right, in Egypt. There's another 5 years. And God sent me ahead of you. Although you didn't think about that, that was the reason why you sold me to Egypt. That I could set up a refuge for you. So Yosef is telling his brothers, don't feel bad that you sold me here, because it was a plan of God, so I should go ahead, and I'll become viceroy, and I'll be there so that I could keep you alive throughout the rest of the famine. And like Yosef did, he kept the Jewish people alive. And then we finish the reading, and then Yosef continues to say, that you didn't send me here, Elohim sent me here. But we already discussed it. It's a mid-conversation. Or if you want to continue the conversation, wait till after the conversation and then stop the leave. Okay. Also, what is Yosef telling his brothers? That you didn't send me here, but Elohim sent me here. The whole subject doesn't make sense, because Yosef already said, don't feel bad. You didn't send me here, only God. And then he continues and says, that you made me the ruler over the Egypt, God made me the ruler over the Egypt, and then he tells him that you didn't send me here, God sent me here. Why does he have to say that again? Okay, the Rebbe is going to explain an idea. I said we're going to go quick through this one. I want to get to the answer, which is a fascinating concept in Avodas Hashem, in our service of God. And the Rebbe connects this was the talk. The Rebbe said again, at the end of the story of Hey Tevis. Why is it that God made it? What was Yosef special at the end of the day, different than everyone else, that he had to be the first one? Right? If everything was a plan by God, that God said, Yosef saying to his brothers, that you didn't send me here, God sent me here. Why? So I should be able to set up the institutions and the system and the environment for you guys to come here and survive the difficulties of Agalos. Right? Yosef we're called Yosef. Yosef represents the ability for Jews to get through Agalos. Yaakov and the Shvatim are Beis Hamikdash Jews, are Eretz Yisrael Jews. How does a Jew survive in Agalos? That's Yosef. But what's unique about Yosef? That Yosef had to be the one is that gives the Jewish people the koiches, the chayas, the ability to survive, and not only that, to thrive in Agalos. The reason why Yosef was the one to be first taken to go down to Egypt to set things up. And through that, the Jewish people went into Agalos, and Yosef led the way, so to say. It's Yosef's way of serving God. The avodah of Yosef was unique. That his way was the way how a Yid gets through Agalos, a Yid gets through the exile, through the diaspora. It's explained in many places. Why was it that the fathers and the tribes chose to be shepherds? It's not a difficult job. And you could cut yourself off from the world. You're out in the field. You're not involved with what's happening in the metropolitans of the city. You're out in the farms, in the fields. And because of this, it didn't interfere. Their job didn't interfere with them staying connected to God, because they didn't have to interact. They weren't in the busy life of the world. They're out in a job that's out in the field, and they could stay connected to God. David wrote the Tehillim in the field. But Yosef shone b'avedasa. Yosef was totally different, even from his forefathers, v'shar shvatim and his brothers. Shegam b'yosi asik b'nani oilam. Although he was out in the world, creating the world, in charge of the world, running the world, turning Egypt into a huge society and an empire. Heim b'beis Potiphar, whether he was in the house of Potiphar, when he had to manage all the things over there. Whatever he had, he ran everything in the house when he was a servant. Or even in the prison, he was in charge. He was in charge of all the prisoners. And he had to do whatever they were doing. He was living the life of an Egyptian, and of an Egyptian prisoner of all things. More so, when he becomes the viceroy. He's running Egypt. Like Paro says, it's on your mouth, Yisha Kalami. No one could even lift their hand in Egypt without getting permission from Yosef. And that was what was unique about Yosef. The notwithstanding of his engagement of the world, to the extent that Imamish was running everything, everyone had to rely on him on any decision they had to make, didn't affect his connection to God. And we don't know about that, about the brothers in Yaakov, because they weren't involved. Their job didn't require them to be so involved in the world. And that's why, you read this, Mitzrayim, Yosef. Going into Agalos requires to be involved in the world. You're amongst the nations. You don't have the security of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore Yosef, who had that power to survive and thrive in Egypt, he had to lead the way. He empowers the Jews throughout the generations. In the life of diaspora, to stay Jews connected even in the exile. In a foreign land like Egypt. And that's why Yosef tells his brothers, you didn't send me here. You didn't sell me here because of some pickering we had about a coat. I was sent here to give you life so you should be able to survive the Golas. For life. God sent me ahead of you. To give you a survival. She'eris, you should find and survive, be able to last in the land of Egypt outside of Eretz Yisrael. She read us the Mitzrayim, Yosef's going down to Egypt. It was not just that he was there. He was sent there. Shlichus means he was a messenger by God. To open the valves, open the passageway. That the Jewish people could survive the exile. To stay Jewish and have a spiritual life, even in the exile, even in the diaspora. Be able to stay connected to Hashem in Mitzrayim. That's what Yosef says. He does. Who does he say sent me? The Rebbe was speaking then so deep in the time of Heitevis that Elikim is not the name of the revealed God. The revealed name of God is Yudke Vavke. Elikim is how God conceals himself in nature. Vishlachani Elikim sent me. V'atem lo atem shlachtem oisihene ki Elikim. Shem Elikim davke, the name Elikim. Midas hadin v'gvura. Judgment, limitations, something, the way things are hidden. Lei shem avayi midas rachm, not the name of compassion. Ki shlicha zuhi ba'ofen shal yuridu l'galos, because we're going down into Galos now, where things are going to be concealed. We're not going to see God. You're not going to see Ruchnis. It's going to be harder to stay a frum Jew. Makim shel helim v'heser, place of concealment. It's difficult for Yosef and Yaakov to live in Egypt. It wasn't pleasant to live there amongst the Goyim and amongst Goyishkeit. And you look around you and you don't see God's compassion. It's Elikim. You don't see open miracles. That Yosef doesn't get overwhelmed by the fact that he's in the situation of Elikim, of concealment. On the contrary, he finds chayus, he finds life in the void of Elikim, in the void of how God conceals himself. Nevertheless, it's specifically because of that. He's able to remain a frum Jew, a religious Jew, stay strong to the faith. Here the Rebbe takes even further. This is still not what Yosef's job is, to survive. We're not survivors. It's not just to survive Galus. He's only taking care of the negative. Hagana, he's protecting that we shouldn't get affected by the negative of Galus, assimilate, get lost, lose our Judaism, be a chalal besada, be a dead person in the field. That's not the only reason Yosef was sent, that we should be able to still survive and stay connected to God and godliness. Yosef's uniqueness over his brothers and even over his father was the word Yosef means to add. He excels. He thrives in Galus. He's not excited to be in Galus, but he's not looking to survive Galus. He's looking, if Galus is the reality, he's going to flip it 180. He's going to turn Galus into opportunity. That's the idea of Yosef. He adds. Okay, Pirish Bepasik, Yosef Hashem li ben achad. The idea of Yosef is to add another child, bring someone else back to Yiddishkeit, bring more godliness to the world. He turns something that's opposite. The person who's not connected to holiness, that person becomes a son, not someone else of God. Not only does Yosef not get overwhelmed and affected by the obstacles of Galus, of exile, on the contrary, he rules over it and brings everything under holiness. Like the Rambam talks about when Mashiach is going to come, the job of Mashiach, Mashiach can't just come to bring us back to where we were. That King David comes back, the rule of the house of David comes back, to bring everything back the way it was. Avor b'nei Yisrael, for the Jewish people, that he's going to build a temple. The temple was before also. The Hanish b'nei Yisrael, Ya'avdus Hashem b'tachlis hashlemus. That's not what Mashiach is here, to bring us back to the days of Solomon. Elagami takenis ha'olam kulei, the whole world should be fixed. Not just for the Jewish people. La'avdus Hashem yachad, that the whole world serves like Hashem. Ki oz ha'epach la'am safa bruda likrei kulam b'shem Hashem. Everyone's going to call out to the name of God. Otherwise, what's the point of Galus? There's no point to go back to where you started from. We saw that Yosef himself did that. He ruled over Egypt, not just that he survived Egypt. But Yosef shalt and he actually ruled over them. But Yosef was shalt al, he's the ruler. Like it says in the Parsha, that he bought all the land of the people of Egypt. Why did he do all this? It's not just to rule over them in the physical sense. He wanted the people of Egypt to become more godly sensitive. And they should fulfill the 7 Noahide laws. He made all the males circumcise themselves, as Rashi brings down. There's a huge difference in these two jobs. It's not just not an extra. It's two fundamental differences of setting up a survival plan and a thriving plan. One is in the Sinas Koyach of Bnei Yisrael, Shinyani Mitzrayim Agalos, Lo Yafriu Eisav Midvei Kusam. One thing is, he has to make sure the Jewish people can survive Galus and not get affected, but their connection to God should not get affected by being in the diaspora. And that's one thing. But a totally another avodah is Hashlita, the fact that you could rule. You are in control to bring godliness, use this as an opportunity. Agalos, you are in control of Galus. That the negative should become positive. The Rebbe says, this idea that Yosef gives every person the method and the ability to survive, he makes it that becomes the person's mitzias. The person becomes the survivor. He's not holding you back. He's able to give you strength that you can survive in the Galus. He empowers you to become a survivor in Galus. And that's why Chazal says, Kol Yisrael Nikrim Hashem Yosef, we're called Yosef. If he should piernisam, because he gave us substance to survive the famine of Galus. Kalkalas Yosef as Achav b'mei Rav Koilel sheYosef nasan koyach l'olech l'Yisrael shegami Rav Ruchni matzav shagalos v'helm v'hesa yoichel achayis chaim ruchnim. Yosef gives us the substance, the tools, that we could live a spiritual life in Galus the way we should. And he made it part of us, like food becomes part of you. That now the person himself and herself becomes a person that could survive the Galus and not get affected. That means Yosef, the first thing is that Yosef makes it that you can survive Galus. It's not a power that comes beyond you. That's why the Jewish people are called Yosef. Because this ability that Yosef has to survive Galus, the first level, he gives it over to them in a way of mazain. This becomes that every Jew can stand and feel strong to stay connected, to daven, to not get lost in Galus. But the second level, to thrive in Galus, to rule Galus, like Yosef ruled the world, that not every Jew has. Mitzrayim, that you become the shayla, the ruler of Egypt. That's Yosef himself has. Yosef was the only ruler. The brothers didn't become rulers of Egypt. So how could a Jew become a ruler over Galus if it's only something that's connected to Yosef? It's Yosef's effect on you that empowers you and has to give you constant koyach. It doesn't become part of you. And here the Rebbe is going to go in that idea of connecting to Rebbe, to the Nasi. And when you go with the shlichus of you want to be a Jew that has the tools to survive Galus, that's the first level. You want to be a Jew that is going to rule Galus, change Galus. You have to stay connected to the Rebbe. You have to stay connected to Yosef, because only Yosef's the ruler. If you're the shliach of Yosef, if you're standing as a messenger of Yosef, you don't have to have the title officially. But you know that I'm going with the koyach of the Rebbe to go and to be effective in the world. You must be, then they have to stay connected as a shliach. But to have your own tools, that's only the first level. You're the messengers of Yosef. We have to, here the Rebbe is just going to explain in the wording, but I want to finish the Fabring and the Sicha. So the Rebbe said basically this idea that that when Yaakov says that Yosef was even greater than me, what he was saying was that Yaakov survived Lavan, but the thriving that Yosef had, the king over, the shaylet, the ruler, everyone changed because of Yosef. That was unique to Yosef. And let's just finish off Sivches. This we have to understand, that all of us tonight learning the Sicha in 5,786, like the Rebbe said in 1986, 87, that we have to know, as from the lesson for us now, that the leader of our generation, the Rebbe is referring to his father-in-law, but the Rebbe, when he talks about his father-in-law, he's talking about himself. My father-in-law, whose name was Yosef, in our generation, he opened V'solas Haderech, and he paved the way, the Chol Talmidov, for all the students of the Rebbe, V'shluchav and his emissaries, Aholchim Midrachav, those who go in the way of the Rebbe, Vayideyim V'chol Bnei Yisrael, and that throughout for the Jewish people. Sheyechel Asik B'afotzes HaTorah V'Yadus, every Yid has the power to go out and spread the word of Torah and Judaism, B'afotzes Me'yanos HaChassidus, and to spread the wellsprings of Chassidus. In every place, in every situation, like Yosef was in every place, in every situation. Mitzrayim, even if you're in the spiritual Egypt or physical Egypt, in the furthest, most distant place. The idea is not just that you should survive and not get affected, and not let it affect your connection to God. And the adrabah, by being a shliach and a talmid, a student of the Rebbe. On the contrary, Mitzrayim doesn't affect you, you affect Mitzrayim. Lachav is called Baya Olam, that the whole world, the Kabbalah mitzvah to take the 7 Noahide laws, to stay godly. Not because the 7 Noahide laws make sense, because that's what God said you have to do. Why Moshe Rabbeinu, like the Rambam says, and Moshe said, came down from the Sinai with the 7 Noahide laws. And so says the Rambam, that's why a Gentile has to keep the 7 no-eyed laws, not because of some ideas that make sense, but because God told Moshe and gave it to the nations that they have to keep the 7 no-eyed laws. By doing so, they're connecting to the will of God, not the logic of God. And if a person's out in the world, and the world looks like Elokim, you're out there and you're seeing it's obstacles, there's no godliness, the world, the narrative is out there is negative. There's judgment, concealment. Even if there's great judgments, it's causing pain, physical and spiritual. Yosef empowers us not to get overwhelmed by the Elokim, but to see that as an opportunity. Wherever you are, whatever situation you are in life, to reveal godliness not in a way of surviving, but in thriving. That you turn it into opportunity, like Yosef turns the acher, the negative, into a ben, into a son. To the highest level. When a Yid goes out with this empowerment to not just survive Agalos, but to change Agalos, and afatzas Torah and spreading Torah and Yadus and Yiddishkeit, and the Mayonis and the wellsprings of Chassidus Chutza, Ad l'chutzah and Chutza mimenu, to a place that's, you can't even find a more distant place than that. Mikarim Mizarzim Segula, this brings the Mashiach. The Mashiach is going to build, Hashem, soon, immediately, the temple in its place, the Kabzin Chayisrael, and gather all of this lost of Israel. The whole world is going to be changed. Is in a tikkun, is going to be fixed. Everyone together to serve God, and this should be b'mheira b'yameinu mamish, speed in our times. Thank you everyone for joining. Good Shabbos, and we'll be in touch for next class. Laila Tov, take care.
Good Shabbos. Thanks, Rabbi.